Welcome back to the Epic Universal Podcast. It is me, entertainment writer Jim Hill, and I am joined now by my co-host, Eric Hersey, who we used to describe as a Disney theme park fan who had never, ever been to a Universal theme park, which I know made him an interesting choice for my co-host on this particular podcast. But that is no longer the case. Am I right, Eric?
Jim, that is true. We are recording the show. I believe today is Tuesday, July 23rd. We are literally 48 hours after we just got back from I think it was an 8-day long trip to Orlando, and which pretty much the majority of the time was spent in the Universal parks and resorts.
Okay, now forgive me for jumping in here, but as anyone who has ever vacationed in Central Florida knows, what Mr. Hersey is dealing with right now. It's that weird post-trip space where you're simultaneously playing catch up on stuff you missed at work, not to mention dealing with the after effects of the trip, like that enormous smelly pile of laundry, or having to haul the empty suitcases back down to the basement, which is why today, right now, we are not going to hit Eric up for his initial impressions of Universal. We want to cut this poor man a break. Give him a moment to breathe, a chance to digest everything that he saw and experienced down in Orlando, and then share his opinions. Which, okay, I know, sounds a trifle bait and switchy, but not to worry. On the very next Epic Universal podcast, Mr. Hersey will be front and center, and he will be talking at length about all of the experiences that he and the family had down in Central Florida.
Right, at length. And I'll be giving opinions from 7-year-olds to 70-year-olds.
Cool.
We had a gamut of people there. So, I mean, it's not to say that I'm going to leave you guys hanging. You see, prior to the family heading down to Florida, we actually recorded a feature piece. We didn't know it was going to come out, but we actually did a piece featuring, it kind of keyed off Van Helsing series we've been doing.
And not to oversell this, folks, but I have to say, I think this feature that Mr. Hersey and I did is the best thing he and I have done together to date. It's a story that an Epic Universal podcast listener actually suggested to us that played to both of our strengths, and I really think this is going to make great listening.
Right. But Jim, that is the second half of the show, so stick around. But I mean, I think we do have some news that we should just address here at the beginning of the show.
Absolutely. But as always, the news portion of today's show is brought to you by touringplans.com. If you, like the Herseys just did, are headed down to Orlando anytime soon to experience some of the theme parks around the city beautiful, Touring Plans can not only help you save time, it can help you save money. So before you book your very next trip to Central Florida, please check them out at touringplans.com.
Jim, I use Touring Plans all 5 days, and truthfully, the it was recommended to go to the roller coaster first, and I had a checklist to do everything, and it said to go there first because, and I'm gonna tell you, thank the heavens for touringplans.com, because I got to do the roller coaster, and it was one of those, we were the first on the ride, and they were like, hey, you want to do it again? Because there wasn't anyone, and they were like, one more time. Later in the day, I'm telling you, that was 60 to 70 minute wait. And no offense to the roller coaster, I'm not sure if I would wait 60 to 70 minutes and or have it as an enjoyable time. So just real quick, Touring Plans told me to do that. And you guys know I am a newbie. I'm a novice. I didn't know, but they were like, do that one first. So good to them.
Much better plug than my plug. Okay. Anyway.
Well, no, listen, I'm an advocate. Okay, so
there we go.
But one thing that we did mention on the top of the show, so we're recording this on Tuesday, the 22nd. So it's literally just after Twisters, a long-awaited follow-up to Universal's, what was the 1996 Twister that just came out. So, all right, so here's the deal. The director, John DeBont, right? He made that, 28 years ago, and it made almost $500 million. I think like $495 million. So what is that, Jim, in today's $1 billion?
Actually,
right?
I went to the inflation calculator before we started here today and ran the numbers, and I want to say it's like $992 million in 2024 dollars. So yeah, almost $1 billion.
Well, that's I would have never guessed it was that successful. But I guess in this case, the Twisters, they're selling what, 81 million worth of tickets over the opening weekend in North America, and then 43 million overseas. So is that going to be as big of an earner? I mean, if we do the math, do you think it's there?
It's a great start, and what you would think would make the executives of Comcast, NBC Universal's parent company, happy, but no.
So to be clear, Comcast execs were happy with how Twisters did this past weekend, or they were unhappy. Like today, anyway, like the company's second quarter earnings like just came out, right?
They did, and they dipped 3% as compared to earnings from this very same period back in 2023.
All right, so I'm not a movie buff, but I do remember last year they had the Super Mario's movie came out, right? And I believe like Fast X, and those were huge hits. I'm talking like, I think we saw Super Mario Brothers like 3 times in the theaters during that run. So that's not necessarily. I mean, we're comparing Twisters and Despicable Me 4,
which, by the way, the Despicable Me 4 currently sits at 580 million at the worldwide box office, and if the numbers continue, it'll blow by 600 million by the end of this week.
Right, but those were outside of that second quarter,
That's true.
right?
That's true.
So you can't compare like the apples to apples. Mm-hmm. It's just, even if they were apples to apples, one might be a Gala apple, and the other one might be a Fiji. Like they're slightly different, right?
Again, me personally, I go for the jazz apples, but that's okay.
Okay.
All right. So, but you're not wrong. That again, and other thing worth noting here is second quarter of last year was also when Super Nintendo World had literally just opened at Universal Studios Hollywood, and of course was this monstrous hit.
Right. That, and I mean, friends that aren't theme park friends were talking about that. They kept saying, "Are you going to go to that in Florida?" I'm like, guys, you are way off. It's not wrong theme park, wrong coast, everything.
There we go.
But
there we go. So.
Maybe they were confused. But did you see friend of the show, Josh Gad, was just, I believe, at Universal Hollywood?
Yes. He and the family got to experience Super Nintendo World and seemed to really enjoy it. Now, speaking of which, though, that interesting little bend on this story. One of the things that Comcast executives revealed today as part of this earnings call was that a number of folks are putting off their next trip to the Universal Orlando Resort because they're waiting to experience Epic Universe. And what's kind of interesting is that Universal tried to counter that by, we just had Eric talking about the Trollercoaster, which of course is part of DreamWorks Land, the redo of the Kid Zone at Universal Studios Florida. Likewise, we had the new daytime parade. In fact, that finally officially opened just last week. We also had the new Lagoon show, Cinesational, the Symphonic Spectacular. And I know we just said we weren't going to do this because we're going to cut Eric a break. But we were pre-gaming, and Eric mentioned that he had seen Disney Dreams That Soar. That's the new drone show out over Lake Buena Vista at Disney Springs. And you also mentioned that you got to see Cinesational, a Symphonic Spectacular during your time at Universal. So I know it's kind of not fair to make this comparison because, of course, Disney Dreams That Soar is strictly a drone show, where Cinesational is at least twice as long and features fireworks and fountains and drones. But
right,
I have to ask: if you were to compare strictly the drone aspect, who made better use of the drones?
Oh boy, if we're saying strictly drone, there were a couple moments in the Disney win that were like jaw dropping. I don't know if the Universal were jaw-dropping. The entire show, spoiler alert here, Sensational, in my opinion, was one of the better nighttime shows I've seen.
Wow.
And we just saw World of Color out in Disneyland, which I thought was amazing. And we've seen, over the last 10 years, pretty much all the nighttime shows. There are challenges, and I think we can go into detail of why I think there would be challenges, just in terms of location to stand. We're around that lagoon, and if you're not head on Sensational, you might not get the same experiences. But from strictly drone, I kind of like the Disney win better. Nighttime shows, Lauren, and if you've listened to the podcast with you and Lauren, she's pretty big Disney and so forth. She believes that the Sensational show at the end of the night is exactly what could give Universal an edge over Disney in terms of, she thinks it's the best nighttime show down there that we've seen in a long time.
Wow.
So, and I agree.
Okay.
In many aspects. There are moments where I'm like, all right, they try to do love story, and I don't know if they do love story quite like Disney, but boy, do they do thrill. Like the Jaws sequence alone got my heart racing, not just because I'm terrified of Jaws, but it was just great. The Ghostbusters section had me completely like applaud, E.T. So there was a lot to it. Sensational was great. So overall, Sensational is the better nighttime show, hands down. But from a drone perspective, there are at least 3 moments: the Baymax drone series, the Death Star, and in my opinion, the Guardians of the Galaxy sequence where they use reverse imaging of people dancing, I thought was brilliant.
So cool. We
got to see it all. And I mean, the only problem is there's a lot of people around you. It is a nighttime show, so you're neck to neck with people, and I hate that. So if I can get a custom, drone show from either one, then I will give you guys the nod regardless.
There we go. By the way, folks, Stephen Sommers' The Mummy is featured in Sensational.
Oh yeah,
but not its spin-off, the Scorpion King, which, by the way, Eric and I are going to talk about at length during the second half of today's show. But first, this. All right, we're now 11 episodes into the relaunch of this podcast, and I guess the Epic Universal podcast is officially a Jim Hill Media show now, because this a series that we told you folks was wrapped up. The story that was complete is still going on. Mind you, this follow-up to Eric and my's Van Helsing series came about because, well, Mr. Hersey and I were taken to task in the past week or so by many Mummy fans. To be specific, these are fans of the 2 Mummy movies that Stephen Sommers personally directed for Universal Pictures, for not mentioning that series spin-off, The Scorpion King, which, help me out here, Eric, released to theaters April of 2002.
2002.
Okay, and there were, 4 direct-to-video spin-offs or sequels to that film. And look, people were right to call us out on this, because The Scorpion King, which was the prequel to The Mummy's Return, which, just remind you here, was released at theaters in May of 2001, was also a spinoff of Universal's Mummy picture franchise. But more importantly, it was the very first movie that Dwayne Johnson ever appeared in.
Now, Jim, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock Dwayne Johnson, is that who we're talking right now?
There we go.
For those living under literal rocks.
But how Johnson actually got this gig is pretty bizarre. And look, back then, Dwayne was one of the biggest things on the WWF, now the WWE. I'm saying that right?
You are right.
Okay.
The World Wildlife Foundation didn't hit him with the chair just yet.
Well, there we go. Okay, so, but this happened really, really fast, because Dwayne only got into wrestling in like 96, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the Rock's early career?
Right, Jim, you're right up my alley. As I'm learning more about Universal, there's one thing that it's very difficult to stump me with, and that is early wrestling, especially in what we call the Attitude Era, which was pretty much 1999. That is the Stone Cold, the Rock aspect. But Dwayne Johnson was really one of the first, he was the first advertised third generation superstars.
Mhm.
So his grandfather, High Chief Peter Maivia, ran an actual territory in Hawaii. And Rocky Soulman Johnson was one of the biggest wrestlers in the 70s, 80s. So Dwayne, as you could probably know, as if you watched one of the Young Rock series, it's a show that I believe was on NBC for a while and tells a lot of the early days, tells a little bit about that. But Dwayne was not getting into wrestling. He was trying to be a football player. And he did a very good job at football, but it wasn't quite enough. It did just so happen that he was a star defensive nose tackle. But it just so happened that a guy named Warren Sapp, which turned out to be a NFL Hall of Famer, was the guy that played in front of him at Miami of Florida. So he ended up having a college slash maybe Canadian football career. And then it just didn't work out. And he was broke. And he pleaded essentially to get into wrestling, which ultimately his dad did not want him to get into. But he said, if you're going to break in, he's going to make him pay. So he made him pay pretty hardcore with a lot of training. And with that kind of reputation, being the WWF at the time, the marketing machine said third generation superstar. I mean, we're talking a 6'4", 275-pound athlete. They brought him right in. And he might have been one of the quickest rise from independent shows, so to speak, to right in the main roster. And they threw him right in, right off the get-go in 1996 in no time whatsoever. And that is where he started as what they deemed as Rocky Maivia. Now, Rocky Maivia was a take on his grandfather and his dad's name. And they really did kind of bring him in as like a blue chipper. He had big smile and was what they call a baby face, a really good guy. And everybody was supposed to cheer for him. But the whole shifting dynamics of culture was changing. And people saw this guy and booed the crap out of him. And in a turn of events, they were like, well, this is a talented guy. And he resented it for a long time. But at the end of the day, the fans turned against him because they were he was shoved in their throat. And then that where The Rock was born. And he started talking about himself in third person because he saw Deion Sanders do it. He prime time this. And then that's where The Rock was born. And from that moment, when The Rock came out and did his eyebrow and said he was going to lay it the smack it down, that is when he just vaulted up. So we're talking 97, 98, 99, and by 2000 is probably him and Stone Cold top earners, making more money than almost anybody in the business. So it was a crazy start.
No, absolutely. But to give you some idea of how far and how fast he traveled, on March 18th, 2000, Dwayne Johnson is the host of Saturday Night Live. And in fact, you have that TV guide, right? I think you just showed that to me.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I got a TV guide, and I don't know if there was ever a pro wrestler on Saturday Night Live before.
No,
I mean,
no.
Andy Kaufman, does that count? I don't think so. But the only, I mean, I don't remember Hogan. So this is a huge deal. And I remember as a fan, the advertisement, and I stayed up and I watched it. I remember there was some type of, I think Catan and The Rock had some type of like caveman skit and stuff. There was good stuff. We all laughed, and literally you couldn't take your eyes off him. At that point in time, I always knew as a wrestling fan, but I think the greater picture is somebody saw something there.
Well, again, thank you for the beautiful handoff there. Great tee up. Because the person who saw the Rock on Saturday Night Live that night was Stephen Sommers. Again, the writer-director of the original Mummy movie, who's 7 weeks out from the start of shooting the Mummy sequel at this point. In fact, production is supposed to get underway in Morocco on May 1st. And at this point, he hasn't found an actor yet to play the Scorpion King in The Mummy Returns. And now what's interesting about, in fact, we talked about this on the most recent show because we were goofing on the fact that the CG on the Scorpion King in The Mummy Returns is terrible. And by the way, as part of today's show, you're going to learn why, but we'll tee that up and get to that in a moment. But anyway, Scorpion King plays a crucial role in this Mummy sequel. It is this character, originally called Matthias, who's a proud desert warrior who basically tees up the story for the sequel. Reader's Digest version, it's the year 3067 BC. Matthias is made with a pact with the god Anubis, who's the god of the underworld. And in exchange for his soul, Matthias wants to be able to conquer Egypt. And a little foreshadowing here, deal does not go well. He actually achieved this goal, and then Anubis shows up to claim Matthias' soul and then pulls him and his army of jackal-like warriors down to the underworld. And whereupon later in the same movie, Imhotep, the title character of the Mummy film series, he then is trying to release the Scorpion King and his jackal army from the underworld, so Matthias and company can then do Imhotep's bidding. But here's the thing, because the Scorpion King is only seen at the very start of this Mummy sequel and then returns toward the end of the final act of the movie, Summers needs a very physical performer with a lot of charisma, because again, you got to see him at the front of the movie and go, oh, that guy, and then remember him when he comes back. And this is the thing, Summers sitting there watching Saturday Night Live, and it's like, that guy looks like he can fill the bill. And by the way, Eric, you're not wrong about the whole charisma thing and how hot he was at the time. It's worth noting that this episode of Saturday Night Live, again, March of 2000, turned out to be the highest rated, most watched episode of the 1999-2000 season of Saturday Night Live, which, by the way, did not go unnoticed by the executives at Universal who work up in the Black Tower.
Right. And I'll tell you one thing, Jim. That's one thing that maybe the wrestling audience is dismissed a lot of times, but they will follow and support their people. That was all about. I remember not watching SNL once in my life, probably. And I tuned in, watched, I taped it on VHS, and I probably still have it somewhere in the archive. That's how dedicated we are. So that's not surprising at all.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. That's what the executives at Universal latched onto when Summers came to them and said, hey, what would you think about this rock guy? The Scorpion King, they're like, oh, we love this idea, because the very thing that it would then juice the audience for this Mummy sequel. And what's so funny is, if you look at the poster that they came up for the theatrical release of The Mummy Returns, I mean, and you have to, it's important to stress here that if you look at all of the screen time for the Scorpion King character, he's in maybe the first 5 minutes of the movie as a live action performer, and then he's in the finale of the film as a basically CG monster with Dwayne Johnson's upper body and face. Total maybe 15 minutes combined in this movie, which, by the way, is 2 hours and 10 minutes long. So he's in the movie less than an eighth of the runtime. And yet, if you look at this poster, there's Brendan Fraser's face at the high noon position, but at 11 o'clock on the very same poster, almost as big as Brendan Fraser, is The Rock. I mean, they made no bones about, he's in this movie. We are promoting that we have Dwayne Johnson. But again, he was a key part of the movie, because movie's promotion, because they were hoping wrestling fans would come out in force to watch this Mummy sequel.
Right. And Jim, and just to reiterate once again, if you weren't living during that time, wrestling was the hottest it's ever been. And if you paid attention to ratings, that on Monday nights, they were historically the number 1 and number 2 shows. We're talking like 7.0 ratings, where nowadays you'd be happy to get a 1.2 or 1.5. So easy. It was just so, and this was a pulp culture phenomenon. Like, there was, if you walked down the street, you were likely to see a Stone Cold or a Rock t-shirt. It just was one of those things.
Okay. But again, getting a little ahead of ourselves here, because we're talking about the finished film and how they promoted it. We're still in the part of the story where Johnson has yet to commit to actually appearing in this Mummy sequel. And again, remember, the white hot phenomena, which means he's a busy guy. So Universal reaches out to Dwayne's representatives, and while they are flattered by the studio's offer, Johnson's people initially turned down Universal because, to be blunt, he is just too busy at that time doing WWF stuff. And to be specific, the month of May, which is when Johnson would need to be on set for The Mummy Returns, so that movie's prologue featuring Matthias, that was when it was scheduled to be shot on location in Morocco, no less. This is the time when he's already scheduled to be crazy busy with WWF star, and inside of a single 3 week span. By the way, Eric, this is what I was able to dig up, that Dwayne was already slated to appear on WWF's Monday Night Raw, where The Rock was supposed to become the new WWF champion title holder. Then, right after that, Dwayne was supposed to be a featured attraction in Judgment Day 2000, which was only the second ever Judgment Day pay-per-view event. Does that sound right?
Right. This at this point in time, they moved from 5 or 6 a year to every single month there was a pay per view, which was a big money. I mean, it was $39.99 every single month. So this was one of the new events that he was gonna help bring in.
All right, and in between those things, Johnson needed to be at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, Michigan, so that he could then tape an episode of the WWF's SmackDown show, and then in between this, you also have to factor in travel time, rehearsal, taking the time to do publicity. You get the idea,
right? Let me just add this real quick, Jim. The fact is, wrestling schedules are gruesome. They're 5 days on the road and 2 days off. So typically a wrestler would Monday Night Raw, which is a live 2-hour television taping. The next day they would do SmackDown, which is actually aired on a Thursday or so forth, but it's a television show. Mm-hmm. They're off on Wednesday, Thursday. They come back and they do house shows, which are smaller markets, non-televised on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So that is a common schedule. They do that entire month. And if you don't do that round, you don't get paid and someone takes your spot. So wrestlers are notorious for being on the road just as much as any band or so forth. So The Rock, if he was their champion, his off days, he almost would be held responsible to do interviews for the company. So these people don't take time off. So if he was willing to do that, it's a gruesome schedule.
Okay. So again, love that insight. And again, long story short, even if The Rock wanted to make his big screen debut in a major motion picture produced by Universal, as you just described, his dance card for the month of May was already full. So playing the Scorpion King just wasn't possible. But here's the thing. Stephen Sommers really, really, really wanted Dwayne Johnson to play the role of Matthias. So he asked the studio to make another run at this WWF star. And so Universal meets one more time with the Rock's representatives, and the two parties take a hard look at Dwayne's schedule for the month of May, and where they previously had seen no free time for this WWF star to fly to the set and play Matthias, the proud desert warrior. This time around, it's like, wait a minute. There's a teeny window of time where if the planets align just right, Johnson could in fact shoot all of the stuff that Sommers needs for the Scorpion King on The Mummy Returns in a single day.
Oh my. And that's a lot to ask from somebody who doesn't have acting credits. It's not like this guy's a professional. He's a wrestler. It's different. So that's crazy. How did he pull that off?
Okay. So here's the plan they put together. All right. On a Tuesday night in May, The Rock, as soon as he finishes appearing in a WWF match in New Haven, Connecticut. So I'd have to assume that was one of the smaller market shows you were talking about.
Maybe.
He climbs on a plane to Morocco. Now, Wednesday afternoon, the plane would arrive in Marrakesh. And you got to understand, it's whatever the flight time is, and it's also 6 hours ahead, time zone wise. Mm-hmm. All right, so he would then go to the set. He'd meet Sommers for the first time in person. They quickly have discussed the script. And then on Thursday, while Sommers continues to shoot Dwayne would meet with the production people. He'd undergo hair and makeup tests, and likewise, the wardrobe people would work on getting his outfit to play the Scorpion King ready. And this whole time, Summers is shooting the movie, and Dwayne was supposed to periodically walk on the set, and it's like, yeah, the hair's okay. No, the makeup needs to be changed, that sort of thing. So, but all of this stuff so that he can then be ready on Friday and again to shoot all of his scenes for The Mummy Returns. And then on Saturday morning, he's supposed to climb on a plane, headed back to the States. So that same night, he can then appear at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit.
So he missed like a date. He missed like one wrestling event.
Maybe that, but this is for me, that sounded impossible. But Universal Pictures gave Dwayne 5 million very good reasons to attempt the impossible. That, in fact, that's the fee that the studio agreed to put up for The Rock to make his first ever appearance in a major motion picture. $5 million. So it's the middle of May 2000. Dwayne finds himself on a flight to Morocco. And once he arrives on the set, it immediately becomes apparent that Universal executives had made a really smart investment when it came to the new Mummy movie. And Brendan Fraser, when he was out doing the awards season circuit for The Whale.
Okay, yeah, that's recent, right?
Well, that's the thing. You remember he took home the Best Actor award just
Right.
last year, but he would get asked a lot about the Mummy movies, and the topic of Dwayne Johnson would come up, and he said, "Hey, we were on the set shooting The Mummy Returns when Dwayne arrived for the first time. I mean, he'd been driven straight from the airport, and as soon as the extras on set saw him, they began chanting, 'The Rock, The Rock.'" And it's like, and the thing that kind of shook Brendan is like, a lot of these people didn't speak English. So it's like somehow they'd seen the matches on the WWF, and they clearly knew who this guy was, and they were excited. And we're standing as the other actors in the film. It's like, wow, we suddenly realized having this guy be in the Mummy sequel is going to be a really big deal. No, funnier part of the story, Fraser and Johnson never actually get to meet in Morocco. By the time Brendan gets out from in front of the camera, Dwayne is already back in the car, headed back to the hotel, because again, the poor guy's jet lagged. It's like, look, get some sleep. You're up early tomorrow to do makeup and hair tests. So the first time these two actually talk is April of the following year, 2001, on the red carpet for the world premiere of The Mummy, which, by the way, not held in Hollywood, but over in London. On the other hand, one performer who Dwayne did get to talk with on his first day on the set of the Mummy Returns was Oded Frere, who played Ardeth Bey in the two Stephen Sommers Mummy movies. And this is an Israeli actor pulled The Rock aside and gave him a piece of advice that, in hindsight, Johnson maybe really wished he had paid attention to. Years later, Dwayne told this story. I said, I remember Oded Fair saying to me, "Rock, you got to watch what you eat over here." And I said, don't worry about it. He's like, no. You can get really sick. Like, I have tuna cans from home. And he's like, and The Rock is, don't worry about it, man. I've traveled the world with the WWF. I've gone some places twice. Just give me some chicken. And I mean, I thought it would be okay to eat the chicken because it was on a skewer. It had been barbecued. I mean, cooked over an open flame. How bad could it be? And then I got so sick.
Gotta be careful with chicken, Jim. No matter what, always gotta be careful. So he got sick.
Oh, not just sick. How sick? Well, Johnson went on to describe how they are shooting his scenes as the Scorpion King at the edge of the Sahara, I mean, places where the temperature on set is 100 degrees or higher. But whenever he's not out in front of the camera doing stuff, Dwayne is wrapped in 3 blankets, shivering. He then went on to explain. He said, I mean, look, it had to be food poisoning. That's the worst. I ever remember feeling. I kept thinking to myself, I'm going to die in the desert. Now, where this gets interesting is, sick as The Rock might have been, Stephen Sommers has nothing but praise for this first-time movie performer. According to the director of The Mummy Returns, Johnson was a total pro on set, an absolute joy to work with. And Summers goes on to say, I mean, the guy's got food poisoning. And but on the day that we had to shoot all of his scenes, Dwayne's there at 2 a.m. to start the makeup process. And you have to understand that it takes 3 hours to get him made up as Matthias. And he then comes on the set and gives us 110% whenever the camera is on. We get everything that we need. And the next morning, he's on a plane back to the States so that he can then appear at a WWF thing in Detroit. So, have you heard stories about this with his work ethic like that,
Oh
or
no, absolutely. I mean, well,
okay?
the thing is with wrestling, we all know that it's what they call a work, right? The fact is, we know who's necessarily winning, but they don't put the champions,
Hmm.
the belt, because the workhorse on anyone but people that have this work ethic. And if you don't, so the fact is, when you say something like, "Oh, The Rock is a 5-time WWE champion,"
Mhm.
they put the belt on him because they know that this is the kind of stuff he will do. If he is sick, he'll go out there and wrestle. If he is off and they say, hey, we need to do a Make-A-Wish, he shows up. And then that's what you hear. So
Mhm.
although we know it's the championship belt is essentially just a prop, you don't get that unless you have that type of work ethic. So it's not surprising at all to me, knowing that food poisoning, he's like, yep, we're making it happen. So
Okay, but getting back to the food poisoning now, obviously, word gets back to the Black Tower that Dwayne Johnson had food poisoning on the set of Mummy Returns, which panics the executive at Universal. So as soon as the rushes come in from Marrakesh, these guys are like, we need to see this because again, we agreed to give this guy $5 million to be in our movie, and we don't want to have blown $5 million at a guy who's blowing lunch off camera. We want to make sure we're getting our money's worth. And but what really startles the executives at Universal is they're watching this early footage from The Mummy Returns is how good The Rock looks on camera. And so now again, back to Summers, who at this point they've finished shooting in Morocco, and they've actually moved to the UK, and they're in Pinewood shooting the interiors for the movie. And so Stephen goes on to say, so I'm shooting, it's still shooting the Mummy sequel, but I'm now getting calls from the president of Universal Pictures. He's telling me, oh my God, look how good this footage of Dwayne Johnson is. And it's just, the guy just jumps off the screen. And now the president of Universal's asking me things like, do you think you could build a Mummy spinoff around this Scorpion King character? Because I think once people see the Mummy Returns, they're going to want to see more movies that feature Dwayne Johnson. This guy looks like a real movie star. So, to please the president of Universal Pictures, sometime over the next week, while Summers is still shooting The Mummy Returns, he comes up with a possible storyline for a standalone Scorpion King movie. Now, mind you, there is a downside to Dwayne Johnson's short time on the set of The Mummy Returns. And by the way, this ties into what we were talking about at the top of the show today. How Eric and I, earlier in the Van Helsing series, were goofing on the bad CG version of the Scorpion King that turns up in The Mummy's Return. But we now know why. And it was because The Rock was only in his Scorpion King outfit with full hair and makeup for a single day. So this movie's visual effects team just did not get sufficient reference time with this WWF star. And also important to understand, we're talking about a movie that's being shot in 2000, the early days of sort of the texture mapping. I mean,
right.
you know how these days you'll see a named performer turn up in a video game,
Oh yeah.
or a great likeness on a toy. Well, that's because they put them in one of those booths where they multiple cameras will take pictures from multiple angles. They'll do strong dynamic poses and that sort of thing. they get that great reference footage. And typically the folks who work visual effects will get an hour or more each time they go to do this, especially in a film set where they want screen accurate hair and makeup and costume for this character in a video or a toy or that sort of thing. They will do multiple passes. Well, in this case, again, Dwayne, they could only get him at the tail end of the day after Summers had gotten everything that he needed. But more to the point, Dwayne, once he walked off set, it was like, Dwayne, we need to put you in a car and get you to the airport. You still have to get to Detroit. So it's like, step into the reference thing. And I'm told they get 5 minutes.
Well, I was going to say, and probably 10 pounds less from all his
Well,
peeking
no,
every night.
that's the other thing. I mean, the poor...
He looks real skinny in CGI.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I'd take some CGI like that right now.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Yes. In fact, I'd make them take the pictures from out in the yard. But yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. That the 5 minutes, and then they had to rip the hair and makeup off him, collect the costume, throw in a car, and take him to the airport. So this is why the CG version of the Scorpion King that appears in The Mummy Returns, the last act of the film, looks so terrible. In fact, the audiences laughed at these scenes, and not in a good way.
Right.
But what's fascinating about this is the visual effects team knew that the Scorpion King, particularly the monster version in the finished film, looked terrible. Again, this is Brendan Fraser out doing award season for Whale. And he talked about how, so I'm at the premiere for The Mummy Returns, and the head of visual effects walks up to me and introduces himself. And before I can continue, he starts apologizing for the CG version of the Scorpion King, saying that, I'm sorry, we needed more time. It is what it is. But in the end, doesn't matter. In spite of the less than impressive monster version of the Scorpion King, The Mummy Returns does well enough at the box office that that Universal, like, oof, yep, we're making a Scorpion King movie. Grab Summers' idea. Let's get started on that. Now, mind you, because Summers is already developing Van Helsing for Universal Pictures, he just cannot direct the Scorpion King movie for that same studio. So Chuck Russell, who helmed The Mask, the Jim Carrey movie, likewise one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, Dream Warrior, he winds up directing this prequel. Though, to keep costs down, it's largely shot in and around Los Angeles in places that sort of look foreign and exotic. We're talking about relatively easy to get to locations like San Simeon State Park, San Luis Obispo, and then the Bronson Caves. Although, another reason I was told, Eric, that the Scorpion King was largely shot in and around Los Angeles. Well, again, The Rock is still under contract to the WWF at the time and has that crazy crushing schedule that you described earlier in the show. So Universal has to shoot around his obligations. And I want to say part of the story here that I found during my research is to help him out a little bit in story during the 2000-2001 season of WWF. They had The Rock banished for like a 5 or 6 week period so that he would have a window of time to do a lot of shooting on this. Do you...
Oh yeah, they probably made Vince McMahon and his powers angry, and they terminated him. So I mean, it's all part of the deal. That's sometimes they're hit by cars, sometimes they're fired, sometimes they get their legs stuck in a steel chair. You never know.
Okay. Well, but again, the thing is with movies, you shoot them, you edit them, and you realize, oh, we need to do retakes, and or reshoots, or we need additional footage, and it's like, well, that's nice that you need that, but again, I'm on the road, I have obligations, and so when it came to the Scorpion King, things got a little tight. I mean, that movie was released to theaters in April of 2002. And the way I hear it, Chuck Russell was still shooting scenes for that film. In fact, out on Soledad Canyon Road, 4 weeks prior to the
Oh,
premiere. I mean,
jeez.
it was just, is he available? Can he fly in for a day? Okay, let's let's shoot those other scenes. But movie does well enough at the box office that the trades announce in fall of 2002 that Scorpion King 2 is already being prepped. But again, Steven Summers knee deep in getting Van Helsing ready to go before the cameras. He can't help Universal while they're developing this script for a Scorpion King sequel, and The Rock reads the script, the Steven Summers free version, and it's like, I'm not good with this. Now, mind you, he still has agreed to make another movie for Universal. So there's a buddy action comedy script called The Rundown,
Right.
and The Rock winds up making that for Universal. That comes out September of 2003 and does well enough at the box office that Hollywood realizes this isn't a fluke. The Rock is a really for real movie star, and the rest of that story, you know. Now, mind you, there are still people at Universal who believe that with or without Dwayne Johnson, the Scorpion King could be a viable franchise for the studio. Now, the project shifts from theatrical over to the home premiere side, and between August of 2008 and October of 2018, 4 Scorpion King direct-to-video films are produced. There's Scorpion King 2, Rise of a Warrior, Scorpion King 3, Battle for Redemption, Scorpion King 4, The Quest for Power, and then there is just the plain old Scorpion King Book of Souls, no number 5. Maybe they can't count that high on the home entertainment side. I don't know. Now, on the other hand, worth noting here that though Dwayne Johnson has appeared in films that to date have made 3.5 billion, sold that much worth of tickets domestically, and then 10.5 billion worldwide. What's kind of cool is that The Rock has a soft spot when it comes to Matthias, the Proud Desert Warrior, which is why back in 2020, Johnson announced with Universal's cooperation, he plans on reviving the Scorpion King film franchise in the not so distant future. And this, Eric, is what Dwayne had to say about this upcoming project through a press release that was issued through Johnson's own production company, $7 Production. And any significance with that name that you know of?
It is, Jim. You're going to ask me a question, and I know the answer. So you're
Cool.
be
Okay.
aware. He when he had his first WWF meeting at a diner with
Mm-hmm.
Jim Ross, head of talent relations, also the famous announcer that many people in wrestling know. He
Mm-hmm.
showed up at the diner with $7, and he said, "I can't eat." And Jim bought him a big old steak. And at that point in time, he says, "You won't have to worry about that anymore, kid." And $7 is exactly how much money he had when he got his big break.
That's a great story. Holy cow. Okay. So Dwayne goes on to say, the Scorpion King was my very first role ever on the silver screen, and I'm honored and excited to reimagine and deliver this cool mythology to a whole new generation. And I couldn't have had the career I'm lucky enough to have had it not been for the Scorpion King. And I'm thrilled that we at $7 Production can help create those same opportunities for other hardworking actors today. And just given the story you just told, I mean, this guy walks the walk and talks the talk. That's great. And by the way, I just for the Disney fans out there, I want to talk for a second here. I know a lot of people at Disney who've worked with Dwayne Johnson on various projects over the past 20 years. These include the Game Plan, Race to Witch Mountain, Moana, and soon to be Moana 2, and the Jungle Cruise. And these people at Disney flat out love Dwayne Johnson because the guy who did the 110% sick on the set, that work ethic is the same guy at Disney. I mean, I don't know if I told you the story about when they did the announcement of the original Moana back in in 2016, Eric, where Disney's publicity department decided we want to do it on Good Morning America, but we feel like it's a story set in the Polynesian Islands. We should do it from Hawaii. And so, and Dwayne was
Jim,
like,
I'm doing math here. That's pretty early.
there we go. All right. So if it's 8 o'clock, depending on the time of year, it's what, 4 hours, 5 hour time difference?
Yeah, something like that, right?
Okay. And Dwayne is like, no problem. I'll fly to Hawaii. And it's like, but wait a minute. It's going to be carry the 2, drop the 4, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It's going to be dark on the beach there. Hang on. Let me get I know some guys who do the fire spinning. I'll make some calls. And that's a thing. You could literally go on YouTube today and watch the footage of the announcement where he's flanked by 2 guys who are doing the fire spinning, but he's there to promote Moana and just said, no problem. I'll do what you need me to do.
He does it too, Jim. He takes his shirt off and he pops in the screen and he's doing the dance. He's doing the Samoan warrior dance. It's amazing. No, literally Dwayne Johnson, from a wrestling perspective, as a wrestling fan, we really appreciate him. He was like the first or one of those homegrown talents that made it big. And for a while, everyone was like, you sold out, you sold out. But the thing is, he came back to wrestling and he was actually in the big event, main event of WrestleMania this year. So he is basically giving back to not just, we're talking about the Scorpion King, his first big break, but he doesn't forget also the wrestling audience. And I think that has earned him a lot of respect, and we still support him. I mean, I'm a huge Rock fan to this day for a lot of that aspect. And I will tell you, not only seek out that one video, but one of my favorite videos of The Rock is he surprises. When he was first wrestling, there was a guy named Downtown Bruno, and he was a manager of a wrestler named Harvey Whippleman. Of course, that's a wrestling. And he's a real scrawny little guy, but he was the one that kind of helped him on the road. And maybe 2 or 3 years ago during the pandemic, he surprised Harvey Whippleman and shows up and just kind of like, hey, so forth. And then says, turn around. And he bought him a brand new truck just because. And you just see this guy like cry. And this is a guy he hasn't talked to, but he remembered that this guy treated him right on his way up. And I just hear that all the time about The Rock. So really looking forward. And you know what? At the end of the day, he makes a Scorpion King. I'll go out and see it.
There we go. And again, it's nice that he remembers, but though I'm hoping some point we get the opportunity to ask him. It's like, so chicken skewers.
That'll get you in a headlock there, Jim. I don't know about that. Or better yet, maybe the people's elbow. Nice, lovely story. I really love, I get to witness this. I told you, I witnessed this firsthand. I remember seeing The Rock doing all this stuff. So it's nice to recount and hear some of I didn't know about the food poisoning, but now all this information and now when I watch, if I go back and watch The Scorpion King or The Mummy, I'll know that he was deathly ill. And we'll appreciate the acting so much more.
Here we go. I really like that piece. And on the heels of the story of Dwayne Johnson here, I'm going to promise folks that Eric and I are going to take a closer look at the professional wrestling related stuff that was done at Disney and Universal back in the 1990s for future shows.
Right. I mean, I'll tell you what, I was just at Universal and there is a picture of wrestling on one of the marquees of like when they were showcasing some of the things they used to film there. So that was pretty interesting.
Okay.
But we will get into everything. Literally, that was just a small thing that I saw and I was trying to find. But we'll get into everything that we kind of saw over the next couple of installments of the podcast.
And again, seriously, folks, did not mean to be baity and switchy today. I mean, okay, here's the analogy. It's the day before Thanksgiving, and you just come back from the supermarket, and yes, you get the kitchen full of stuff you can use to make a terrific feast. All of the necessary ingredients. You still have to cook the meal.
Right. So I hope everybody liked today's tale of Dwayne Johnson's basically entry into movie making. So we would love to know your thoughts on the feature in general. We welcome your feedback.
Which, by the way, you can send directly to us or post on social media. Speaking of which, Eric, where can folks find you online?
Well, listen, if you guys were following me on Instagram, you saw tons of pictures of me at Universal this last week. So follow me on Instagram for pictures and and follow me on X for complaints about the Vineland retail outlet and not being able to find a parking spot for the character warehouse. So if you want rants there, that's what you'll find over there. Jim, where can we find you at?
I'm sorry. I saw the lovely image of you and Lainey with your butterbeer mustaches. I did not see the rants about the premium outlet and the parking situation, but man, I know of what you speak there. Anyway, we can find me. I'm on Twitter or X and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and over on Facebook at Jim Hill Media News. Also, want to remind you, we do have some other podcasts here at the Jim Hill Media Network we'd like you to check out. We, of course, have Disney Dish that I do with Len Testa. Likewise, we have Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, who, by the way, has his own wonderful official Mission Impossible podcast, Light the Fuse, which he does with Charles Hood. We also have Looking at Lucasfilm. In fact, Brian Gahn and I just did a brand new episode where we take a look back at the recently wrapped up limited series, The Acolyte. And I'm sure someday, very soon, your bride and I will be recording a brand new episode of our merch podcast. I Want That Too, where Lauren will talk about, I guess, all manner of things you guys saw while you're down at Walt Disney World. Beyond that, also want to mention that we've begun hosting a wonderful new podcast, Manufacturing the Magic, which looks back over the history of themed entertainment. That's hosted by Shelley and Noah Valladolid. Please check that out. And I would be remiss if I did not mention Disney Unpacked, which is the video show that Len and I have been doing with a veteran Imagineer, Jim Schul, and Eric's been doing yeoman's work editing that show. That's over on Patreon, and we're in the process of wrapping up season 1 with a show about how Paradise Pier got turned into Pixar Pier, and season 2 should get underway shortly.
Well, I think, if you're looking for season 2, I think we're just starting to work it. It's the water show, so it's a good episode that is coming along. So check out the Paradise Pier and come along for the water show that we'll be working on shortly.
Cool. All right, and again, not to oversell it, but shortly here on the Epic Universal podcast, we will have Eric Hersey talking at length about his family's very first experiences at the Universal Parks and Resorts down in Florida. And I can't wait for these shows. I can't wait.
No, and listen, I tried to get everything done. There's only like 3 attractions that I did not get done. So I experienced everything, whether I was scared or not. So we made it all happen. Lots to talk about, lots of questions to ask Jim, and lots of questions in terms of history and where things were and why things are that. So I think it's not just going to be a giant trip report where I give you opinions. I think, Jim, you're going to enlighten a lot of us on like, why did it happen this way? So I'm really excited about that. But for that's coming shows. So stick with us, tell your friends. It's super important from an algorithm standpoint that if you give us a review or you like it or you share or you subscribe, we appreciate that. But until our next show, on behalf of Jim Hill, I'm Eric Hersey. Hey, thanks for listening.